The collapse of the Centauri civilization. The once dominant Centauri civilization, which had been the pride of the galaxy, was now teetering on the edge of complete annihilation. The Galactic Council, which had always been so eager to praise the Centauri for their unparalleled advancements, now stood silent in the face of their desperation. The Crimson Plague was unlike anything any of them had ever encountered. It was as if the very fabric of life itself had turned against them. The disease wasn't just a simple virus. It was an evolution gone awry, mutating faster than their medical systems could even comprehend. At first, the outbreak was just a whisper in the dark, a handful of reports from the farthest reaches of their empire. The Centauri, confident in their medical advancements, brushed it off. They had faced diseases before, but nothing had ever posed a true threat. Their technology, advanced beyond any species in the galaxy, could handle even the most resilient pathogens. But this time, they were wrong. The plague spread like wildfire, its effects unlike anything the Centauri had ever seen. The first symptom was mild fatigue, something easily mistaken for a passing illness. But soon, the fatigue gave way to something far worse. The cellular structures of the Centauri began to disintegrate from the inside out. Flesh turned to ash, organs failed, and bones dissolved. And as the virus continued its rampage, it seemed to actively seek out the strongest and most vital of their population, leaving entire cities in ruins. As the death toll soared, the once thriving Centauri cities fell silent. Streets that had been bustling with life were now eerily empty, the buildings standing like silent tombstones. Desperate cries echoed through the air, but they were met with nothing but the sound of the wind. Their medical systems, once the envy of the galaxy, now seemed utterly useless. The virus had mutated too quickly for even their advanced artificial intelligences to keep up. These systems, designed to analyze and solve any medical problem, were helpless in the face of the virus's relentless evolution. Algorithms, no matter how sophisticated, could not account for the virus's unpredictable behavior. The Centauri Council convened in an emergency session, each member trying to find a solution. But the endless debates and committees produced nothing but empty promises. As billions continued to perish, they argued over technicalities. Ambassador Thexran, an aging Centauri diplomat known for his elaborate speeches, solemnly stroked his ceremonial whiskers and suggested that perhaps the economic implications of any potential intervention should be studied before any action was taken. "We must consider the long-term consequences," he muttered, seemingly oblivious to the cries of those dying outside. The situation grew dire with each passing day. Entire sectors of their empire had fallen into chaos. With no medical solutions in sight, the Centauri fleet, once the pride of the galaxy, had been repurposed into a quarantine force. The once formidable ships now patrolled their borders, ensuring that no infected ships could escape, potentially spreading the virus to neighboring systems. But even their fleet, mighty and imposing, was losing the battle. The disease spread faster than they could contain it. And yet, the Council, wrapped in the safety of their political bubble, continued to discuss theoretical solutions. One particularly infuriating exchange occurred when the pharmaceutical consortium of the 7 systems offered to help, but only for a price. They would develop a cure, they said, but first, the Centauri would need to surrender control of their most valuable resources. Mining rights to their 3 most resource-rich planets, their most valuable quantum engineering patents, and even access to their medical research. The consortium would only offer a cure if the Centauri were willing to sell their very soul. It was in this desperate moment, as the Centauri's elite doctors scrambled to find any solution, that the most unlikeliest of transmissions arrived. The message wasn't from an established, advanced species like the Arcturians, nor from the highly regarded Orion Empire. It wasn't even from the Proxima Collective, the supposed allies that had always maintained a cordial relationship with the Centauri. No, this message came from a species so new to space travel that they hadn't even reached beyond their own solar system. Humans. The Centauri Council, skeptical of any species that hadn't even begun colonizing their own planets, was at first dismissive. How could a species as primitive as humans even begin to help? Their technology was outdated, their biology vulnerable, and they had no advanced medical systems to speak of. The council members laughed at the idea of humans offering aid. They believed the humans were still struggling with their own internal conflicts, fighting over resources, plagued by political infighting and social unrest. To the Centauri, they seemed like little more than an amusing curiosity, an insignificant species lost in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. But desperation changes everything. And when all other options had been exhausted, Admiral Krell Voss, the last commander of the Centauri Defense Fleet, made the decision to respond. It wasn't out of hope. There was no hope left. It was out of pure necessity. He didn't believe that humanity would offer any real help. No, he thought, this was simply the last formality, the last desperate cry for assistance from a dying species. What came next, however, defied all expectations. The transmission was simple, direct, clear. Captain Maya Torres of the RSS Hope introduced herself and her crew. They were, she said, here to help. That was all. There were no guarantees, no promises of success, just an unwavering offer to assist. As Krell listened to her message, he found himself puzzled. What could these humans possibly offer that the rest of the galaxy couldn't? Their ship, the RSS Hope, wasn't even using quantum entanglement for communication, something that had been a standard for hundreds of years. Their technology, at best, was rudimentary, primitive, yet they were boldly sending a message to the Centauri, offering aid in the face of their impending doom. For the first time in a long while, Krell felt something stir within him, a spark of curiosity, a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in months. Could these humans truly be the answer? Would their humanity, their spirit, be enough to overcome the devastation that had brought the mighty Centauri to their knees? This was a question Krell never thought he would have to ask. But as the RSS Hope drew nearer, the reality set in. Sometimes the most unexpected sources of help are the ones that save you. In a galaxy filled with arrogance and bureaucracy, the humans seemed to offer nothing but their raw, unpolished determination. And as the first of their ships entered the Centauri sector, it was clear this was going to be an adventure unlike any the galaxy had ever witnessed. And so began the story of how humanity, with all its imperfections and flaws, would save an entire civilization. But that, as they say, is only the beginning. The first contact with humanity. Admiral Krell Voss had seen many things in his long career. He had overseen the rise of his people, the Centauri, from a humble species to the undisputed leaders of their corner of the galaxy. He had witnessed the elegance of their advanced technology, the power of their quantum fleets, and the delicate balance of politics within the Galactic Council. But nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for what he was about to face when the RSS Hope arrived. As the ship neared their quarantine zone, Krell stood at the observation window of his flagship, the Sentinel, staring out at the black void of space. The stars shimmered like cold diamonds in the distance, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy, and how small their problems seemed in comparison. Yet here he was, on the edge of extinction, watching a vessel that looked more like a relic than a salvation. The RSS Hope was an odd sight. It was no battle cruiser or sleek medical ship, as one would expect in a situation like this. Instead, it was an antiquated freighter, barely holding itself together, its hull a patchwork of old metals and faded paint. The Centauri had always prided themselves on their ships, sleek, efficient, and built with the finest materials the galaxy had to offer. The RSS Hope, on the other hand, seemed like a ship from a forgotten time, clunky and fragile, like a piece of ancient history that had somehow stumbled into the present. Krell couldn't help but chuckle bitterly at the absurdity of it all. How could a ship like that possibly stand a chance against the Crimson Plague? Their own fleets, equipped with nanotech, quantum shielding, and medical aid, far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, were faltering. And yet, here was this strange vessel from a species barely out of its infancy in space exploration, daring to challenge fate. It was both laughable and humbling. As the RSS Hope transmitted its arrival code, Krell's comms officer flicked the switch, and the face of Captain Maya Torres appeared on the holoscreen. A woman with fiery determination in her eyes, her face partially obscured by a thick visor, but her voice clear and confident. "Admiral Krell Voss," she began, "this is Captain Maya Torres of the RSS Hope. We've heard of your plight. We're here to help." Krell leaned forward, the weight of his centuries-old command pressing heavily on his shoulders. "Captain Torres," he said, his voice measured but weary, "I don't know what help you think you can provide. This is a Level 9 biological crisis. Your ship isn't even equipped for quantum shielding. You're walking into a death zone. Your people will be dead within hours of entering our quarantine zone." Torres smiled, a gesture that was simultaneously full of defiance and a strange sense of calm. "We know the risks, Admiral," she said, "and we're ready to take them. We may not have your advanced technology, but we have something just as important: determination. We faced our own battles, our own plagues, and we've learned to fight with what we have." Krell stared at her, not knowing whether to be impressed or outraged by her boldness. This was insanity. In all his years, he had never seen a species so casually disregard their own safety. To him, it felt like they were rushing toward oblivion, not salvation. "You're out of your depth," Krell warned, a harsh edge creeping into his voice. "We have spent centuries perfecting our medical technology. What can you possibly offer us that we haven't already tried? Your technology is outdated, and your medical systems are far behind ours. What could you possibly know that we don't?" Torres didn't flinch. "We have something that your technology can't replicate, Admiral," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "Creativity. Adaptability. Humans have learned to survive by finding solutions in places others wouldn't even think to look. Our methods may seem primitive compared to yours, but they work. And that's why we're here. To help you think outside the box. To bring something new to the table." Krell's eyes narrowed as he processed her words. It was an absurd proposition. How could a species that still had to deal with common colds and basic diseases have anything of value to offer in the fight against a galactic-level plague? The Centauri had always prided themselves on their medical prowess, their ability to analyze and categorize problems with an accuracy that was nearly perfect. The idea of relying on creativity seemed more like wishful thinking than a viable solution. Nevertheless, desperation had driven him to the point where he was willing to entertain any possibility, no matter how improbable. "Very well," Krell said, his tone neutral but cautious. "You may enter our quarantine zone, Captain. But understand this: if you fail, we will have no choice but to hold you responsible." "We understand, Admiral," Torres replied with a hint of a smile. "We'll do our best. We're ready to do whatever it takes." As the RSS Hope made its way toward the docking bay, Krell couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. These humans, with their primitive tools and outdated ships, had no business being here. Yet they were coming anyway, not because they thought they could save the day, but because they had no other choice. The Centauri were dying, and the humans had decided they would not stand by and watch. When the ship finally docked, Krell stood with his officers, waiting for the humans to disembark. The medical team aboard the RSS Hope was led by Dr. Sarah Chen, a woman who, despite her lack of advanced technological enhancements, seemed to carry a quiet confidence. Her crew followed her, each wearing bulky, outdated hazmat suits that looked completely out of place against the backdrop of Centauri's pristine medical technology. It was almost comical how out of sync they seemed with everything around them. As the airlock opened, Krell was struck by the sight of the humans. They weren't the polished, professional team he had expected. They were disheveled, sleep-deprived, and covered in the grime of their long journey. The suits they wore weren't the sleek, sterile armor that the Centauri typically wore. Instead, they looked like they had been hastily put together, with parts held together by duct tape and other makeshift repairs. But it was their eyes that caught Krell's attention. There was no fear in them, no hesitation, just a quiet determination that despite their obvious lack of resources, they were there for one reason: to help. Dr. Chen approached Krell, her face half obscured by the visor of her suit, but her eyes glowing with an intensity he hadn't seen in a long time. "Admiral Krell-Voss," she said, her voice strong but warm, "we're here to find a solution. No matter how unorthodox, no matter how long it takes, we'll help you solve this." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Krell felt something stirred deep inside him, a spark of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Could these humans, with all their so-called primitive methods, actually have something to offer? Could their creative, chaotic approach be the key to solving the problem that had eluded even the greatest minds of the galaxy? As Krell led them to the medical facilities, he couldn't help but watch them closely. There was no arrogance in their movements, no sense of superiority, as he had seen in so many other advanced races. Instead, they worked with what they had, improvising when necessary, and not caring about making mistakes. The Centauri had always prided themselves on perfection, on doing everything by the book, by the numbers. But these humans, they were willing to break all the rules if it meant saving lives. It was a strange thing to witness, this mixture of chaos and order, of innovation and failure. But Krell had to admit there was something undeniably powerful about it. These humans had no advanced medical equipment, no nanotech or quantum fields. But they had something else, a deep, unyielding determination that despite their lack of resources, would not let them fail. And that was the moment when Krell realized the true nature of this mission. It wasn't just about the cure. It was about a new way of thinking, a new way of solving problems. And in the midst of their darkest hour, it was the humans who had come to teach the Centauri something they had long forgotten: how to think differently, how to embrace the chaos, and how to fight for survival when all hope seemed lost. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, Krell felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: the human approach to medicine. As the days wore on, Krell found himself increasingly fascinated by the humans' methods. Despite their lack of the advanced tools and quantum-enhanced technology that the Centauri had relied on for centuries, there was something undeniably effective about the way they approached the plague. Their medical procedures were raw, instinctive, and driven not by cold data, but by experience and an unrelenting drive to find solutions. Dr. Sarah Chen, with her unassuming demeanor and remarkable intellect, seemed to be the heart of the human team. She moved through the Centauri medical facilities with a quiet authority, not flustered by the chaotic nature of the plague. While the Centauri scientists scurried about in panic, analyzing data and attempting to force solutions that adhere to their perfect standards. Dr. Chen did something far different. She listened, she observed, and she tested. "Let's look at this a little differently," she said one evening as she gathered her team around a set of samples. "We've been fighting the virus for weeks now, but what if we're fighting it all wrong? What if the virus isn't something to be eradicated, but something to be understood? It's behaving differently than any pathogen we've seen before, and that's why our standard models keep failing." The Centauri scientists were skeptical, their pride in their own technology making them resistant to the idea of abandoning their established methods. But as Krell stood in the corner of the room, watching, something inside him began to stir. He had always prided himself on leading a civilization that had eliminated every possible disease and illness. And now, here he was, relying on a group of humans who had only just recently begun to explore space, offering solutions that the Centauri's finest minds had dismissed. It was humbling. Dr. Chen gathered the team together and began to explain her radical theory. "We're looking at this from the wrong angle," she said, her voice steady. "The Centauri's biology is unique. It's evolved over centuries of careful engineering and quantum adjustments. But this virus is trying to rewrite that biology. It's not a plague in the traditional sense. It's more like an attempt to create an upgrade, a forced evolutionary shift." At first, this idea was met with disbelief. The virus was spreading faster than they could control it, mutating constantly, bypassing the Centauri's immune systems, and leaving entire populations vulnerable. To think of it as a potential evolutionary boost seemed impossible. But Dr. Chen continued, undeterred by the resistance. "We need to stop seeing it as something inherently harmful," she explained. "Yes, it's killing people, but that's because it's attempting something that's not compatible with the Centauri biology. It's like trying to install an incompatible operating system on a quantum computer. What we need to do is merge the virus's mutation with the Centauri's biological systems in a way that allows both to coexist and improve one another." The Centauri scientists were still not convinced, but they had already seen the failure of every other approach they had tried. Krell himself, exhausted and nearly overwhelmed by the endless death around him, had reached the point where he was willing to try anything. Dr. Chen's idea was radical, but it was also the only one that made sense at that moment. The next few days were a blur of activity. The humans began conducting experiments that combined Centauri technology with their own rudimentary medical tools. They didn't rely on advanced quantum computing to model the virus's behavior. Instead, they used basic microscopes, glass slides, and a huge supply of patients. Dr. Chen and her team spent hours studying each viral mutation, tracking its progression, and attempting to predict its next move. "Think about it," Dr. Chen said to her team one night. "This virus is trying to mutate Centauri biology, and we need to help it. We need to find a way to make it work with their advanced genetic systems instead of fighting it. If we can give the virus the right conditions, we can guide its evolution into something beneficial." The humans worked late into the night, running tests, sharing ideas, and laughing at the absurdity of their situation. Despite the gravity of the situation, despite the looming collapse of an entire civilization, they remained optimistic. There was a certain resilience in them, a refusal to give in, no matter how impossible the task seemed. This attitude, this unshakable belief that no challenge was too great to overcome, was something Krell had never seen before. It was a strength that came not from technology, but from the very essence of humanity itself. The Centauri medical staff, meanwhile, were becoming increasingly frustrated. They had spent decades perfecting their knowledge of biology, and now they were watching a team of unenhanced humans throw their scientific principles out the window. It was maddening to see these primitive beings work without the benefit of advanced tech or the meticulous, methodical procedures that the Centauri valued so much. Krell overheard one of his medical officers muttering, "These humans are playing with fire. We have quantum field doctors who can stabilize entire populations with a single scan, and they're here trying to cure the plague with nothing more than simple biology and instinct." Despite his officer's objections, Krell couldn't deny that something was working. The human team wasn't just experimenting. They were learning, adapting, and pushing the boundaries of what the Centauri had thought was possible. For every failure they encountered, they simply adjusted and tried again. They didn't let setbacks define them. They saw every failure as a lesson, a step closer to finding the solution. And then one day they made a breakthrough. It happened so suddenly that Krell almost didn't believe it. Dr. Chen and her team had been working on combining the virus's mutation with a sample of Centauri DNA. The results, at first, were alarming. The mutation was unstable, chaotic, and seemed to be causing more harm than good. But the humans didn't give up. Instead, they adjusted their method, making small tweaks to their process, using techniques that the Centauri considered primitive, yet strangely effective. We need to allow the virus to evolve, but we also need to guide it. Dr. Chen said, speaking to Krell in a tone that conveyed both excitement and urgency. Think of it as an untamed force of nature. If we try to control it too much, it will rebel. But if we can create the right environment, it can adapt to the Centauri biology in a way that benefits them. The Centauri scientists watched in disbelief as the humans continued to experiment with such crude tools, yet their results were undeniable. The virus, once a deadly force, had begun to stabilize, showing signs of integration with the Centauri genetic structure. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Real, tangible progress in a situation that had seemed completely hopeless just days before. Krell could hardly believe his eyes. The humans had done what his people, with all their advanced technology, had been unable to achieve. They had found a way to turn the tide of the plague, not through sheer force, but through understanding, creativity, and a willingness to embrace the unpredictable nature of the virus. As the days went by, the Centauri medical staff reluctantly began to admit that the humans had found something they had missed, a solution born not from their advanced technology, but from the humanity and adaptability that they had brought to the table. The plague was far from over, but for the first time in months, there was hope, and it came from a place the Centauri had never expected. The raw, unpolished creativity of a species that had never known true perfection, but had always known how to survive. Krell watched as Dr. Chen and her team continued to work, tirelessly, without rest. They weren't driven by a need for recognition or glory. They were driven by something deeper. A desire to help, to solve problems, and to make a difference. It was something that no amount of technology or scientific theory could replicate. In that moment, Krell understood what the humans had brought to the table. It wasn't just a cure or a new way to fight the plague. It was a lesson in resilience, in adaptability, and in the power of human ingenuity. And as the first signs of recovery began to show in the Centauri population, Krell realized something even more profound. The future of the galaxy was no longer in the hands of the technologically perfect, but in the hands of those who could think differently, who could adapt and evolve when faced with the greatest challenges. And the humans, in all their imperfect brilliance, were showing the galaxy how to do just that, the breakthrough. The days that followed the breakthrough in the Centauri medical facility were nothing short of a whirlwind. The humans, with their unorthodox methods and unwavering optimism, had ignited something in the Centauri. It wasn't just the breakthrough itself, it was the manner in which it was achieved. For the first time in ages, Krelvos saw his people stepping away from their obsession with perfection and embracing the chaos of the unknown. The initial tests had shown promising signs. The virus, which had previously destroyed their people's very cells, had begun to integrate with their genetic code in a manner no one had predicted. It wasn't a perfect solution, not by any means. There were still failures, still mutations that caused temporary setbacks, but for the first time since the plague had begun, there was hope. Not the kind of hope that relied on technological superiority or quantum perfection, but the kind of hope that was born from experimentation, from taking risks, and from the human ability to adapt quickly to adversity. The Centauri scientists were beginning to show signs of acceptance, albeit grudgingly. They watched as Dr. Chen and her team continued to experiment, refining their methods, and applying a philosophy that seemed entirely foreign to them. The Centauri had always strived for control. Every variable had to be accounted for. Every result had to follow a clear, predictable path. The humans, however, had embraced unpredictability. They didn't try to suppress the virus's mutations. They encouraged them, allowing nature to take its course, while subtly guiding it in a direction that benefited their biology. Dr. Sarah Chen had insisted from the start that they would not rely on technology alone to find the cure. She'd warned her team that it would take more than medical knowledge and advanced tools. It would take understanding, creativity, and a willingness to think differently. It was an approach the Centauri had never considered, having always believed that perfect technology would always yield perfect results. On the fourth day after the breakthrough, Dr. Chen gathered her team and Krell in the laboratory. Her face, as always, was partially obscured by the thick visor of her hazmat suit, but there was an undeniable excitement in her eyes. She had spent the last few days testing the integration process, experimenting with different ways to guide the virus's mutation while minimizing its harmful effects. The results were promising, but she knew they were still in the early stages. "Admiral," she began, her voice crackling through the comm system. "We've managed to stabilize the first batch of patients. Their symptoms have been reduced dramatically, and they are starting to recover. We've even begun to see some unusual genetic improvements. It's not just about survival anymore. These individuals are becoming stronger, more adaptable. We've given them a chance to evolve. Not just a cure, but a way to evolve in the face of this plague." Krell's eyes narrowed, not in skepticism, but in awe. He had been watching the Centauri people die in the thousands, with no cure in sight. To hear that their people might actually become stronger, more resilient, he couldn't fathom it at first. His mind struggled to keep up with the implications of her words. This wasn't just about saving lives. This was about transforming them, about taking what had seemed like an insurmountable problem and turning it into an opportunity for growth. "We need to move quickly," Dr. Chen continued, flipping through her data with a practiced ease. "The virus is evolving with the Centauri biology, but the process is still unstable. We need to introduce a secondary compound to stabilize the mutation further, something to act as a catalyst for the integration process. The humans have faced plagues before, but we've never had a situation like this. We're navigating uncharted territory, and I'm not going to pretend we have all the answers, but I can promise you this: we won't stop until we've found the solution." As she spoke, Krell watched as her team, despite their exhaustion, worked with a feverish intensity. Their methods were far from perfect. In fact, their laboratory looked like a chaotic mess of research papers, glass beakers, and hastily scribbled notes. There was no grand, coordinated approach here, no grand unified theory to explain their progress. It was messy, unpredictable, and full of mistakes. But the passion in their eyes was undeniable, and in a way, it was the very imperfection of their approach that made it so powerful. The Centauri, in all their technological might, had built a system of perfect efficiency. They had algorithms that could predict the outcomes of complex biological interactions with near-perfect accuracy. But in their reliance on perfection, they had missed something fundamental: the ability to work with the unpredictable, to embrace the failures, to learn from them, and grow stronger as a result. This was where the humans were showing the greatest strength, in their ability to adapt. "Admiral," Dr. Chen said, looking up from her work with a determined look on her face, "I need your approval to move forward. We've isolated a compound that may stabilize the mutation and allow us to take the next step in this process. It's a risk, but we have no other choice. Without this, we risk the mutation becoming more volatile. With it, we may have a chance to save not just your people, but the entire galaxy." Krell felt a knot tighten in his chest. The weight of the decision before him was immense. He had seen his people wither under the plague, their bodies slowly deteriorating as the disease spread. He had witnessed the endless debates and bureaucratic delays from the so-called advanced civilizations, each more concerned with their own political gains than with the suffering of the Centauri people. But now, in front of him, stood a group of humans who, despite their primitive technology and incomplete understanding of the virus, were offering a real chance for salvation. He thought back to the moment when the humans had first arrived, their ship a relic of the past, their methods considered by his people to be laughable. He had almost dismissed them, had almost turned them away. But now, after seeing their progress, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude. They had brought something new to the table, not just their medical knowledge, but their attitude, their perseverance, their refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. With a deep breath, Krell made his decision. "Proceed," he said, his voice steady but filled with a weight he could not quite place. "You have my approval. Do what you must to save our people." Dr. Chen nodded, a look of both relief and determination crossing her face. "Thank you, Admiral. We'll make it work. We'll save them." The days that followed were intense. The human team worked tirelessly, introducing the compound into the mutation process and monitoring the results. The Centauri scientists, though initially skeptical, began to join in the effort, slowly realizing that the humans were onto something. It wasn't just about advanced technology. It was about perspective, creativity, and the willingness to adapt in ways the Centauri had never considered. As the compound began to work, something extraordinary began to happen. The mutations that had once ravaged Centauri biology were no longer destructive. They were enhancing it. People who had once been on the brink of death were now recovering. And more than that, they were becoming more resilient, more adaptable, their bodies evolving to withstand the virus. It was as if the plague, which had seemed like a death sentence, was becoming the very thing that would save the Centauri. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. What had begun as a hopeless situation, a galaxy on the brink of collapse, was now teetering on the edge of a new beginning. And it was all because of the humans, with their flawed, chaotic methods, had done what no one else could. They had found a way to make the impossible possible. As Krell watched the first patients recover, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of awe. He had seen the best minds of the galaxy fail. But these humans, these primitives, had done what no one else could. They had saved his people. And in doing so, they had shown him something far more important than just a cure. They had shown him the true strength of the human spirit, the cure and the great awakening. The moment of recovery was nothing short of miraculous. It wasn't just the physical restoration of those who had suffered from the plague, but the realization that the virus had, in fact, transformed them. The Centauri, with all their advanced genetic engineering and quantum technology, had always believed that they controlled their biology. They had perfected it to an extent that no other species could fathom. And yet, here were humans, without the same advanced tools, without the quantum fields or genetic modifications, doing the unthinkable. They had taken the virus, something that had torn their civilization apart, and turned it into a tool for evolution. The Centauri were not just surviving anymore. They were becoming stronger, more adaptable, and better suited to face any challenge. As Krell watched the transformations unfold, he could scarcely believe the implications. The plague, which had once seemed like an inescapable death sentence, was now being seen as a turning point, a gift, albeit a painful one. The humans, with their peculiar and seemingly chaotic methods, had offered not just a cure, but a whole new way of thinking. For the first time in centuries, the Centauri were confronted with the realization that their flawless technological systems were not the answer to every problem. They had always believed that perfect technology could overcome anything. But in the end, it was the human ability to think outside of the box, without the constraints of perfection, that had saved them. Krell had spent years watching his people evolve through sheer force of will, pushing the boundaries of science and technology to its limits. But now he was seeing a different kind of evolution. It wasn't about control, it wasn't about perfection. It was about adaptability. And that was something that the Centauri had forgotten. Watching the humans work, Krell began to understand the depth of their wisdom. They were not interested in solving every problem with a perfect solution. Instead, they embraced uncertainty, knowing that sometimes the only way to solve a problem was to face it head-on and be willing to adapt, even if it meant failing along the way. The humans' approach had been radically different from anything the Centauri had ever considered. They had taken a biological crisis, something that should have wiped out an entire civilization, and instead of using their advanced technology to suppress it, they had used it to guide the Centauri toward a new biological future. They had allowed the virus to work with the Centauri biology, transforming them into something more resilient and adaptable, something stronger than they had ever been before. As the days passed, more and more Centauri people began to show signs of recovery. Their cellular structures were not just returning to normal. They were improving, evolving in ways that no one could have predicted. There were minor differences at first: heightened senses, improved strength, faster reflexes. But as more patients were treated, these changes became more profound. Centauri soldiers, who had once been brought low by the plague, were now returning to active duty stronger than ever before. Their bodies, once ravaged by the virus, now seemed to thrive in the face of it. Krell could not ignore the profound impact of what was happening. His people, who had always prided themselves on their genetic perfection, were now becoming something different, something more. The virus had rewritten their biology in ways that their own science could never have imagined. It was as if the plague had forced the Centauri to evolve beyond the limitations of their technology, beyond the perfection they had strived for. In the process, they had become something even greater than they had ever hoped to be. The virus, in its chaotic and destructive nature, had inadvertently opened a door to a new stage in Centauri evolution. But it wasn't just the biological changes that were profound. There was a social shift taking place as well. The humans, with their unrelenting optimism and belief in the power of creative thinking, had begun to inspire the Centauri in ways that went beyond medical recovery. The Centauri, who had once prided themselves on their technological superiority, now found themselves questioning the very nature of their civilization. Were they truly as advanced as they had once believed, or had they become so obsessed with perfection that they had lost touch with the very thing that made them resilient in the first place, adaptability. As the days turned into weeks, the humans continued to work alongside the Centauri medical teams, not just offering solutions to the plague, but teaching them how to think differently. They had no interest in maintaining the status quo. Instead, they encouraged the Centauri to embrace change, to accept that imperfection and adaptability were not signs of failure, but of strength. Dr. Chen, in particular, became a beacon of this new way of thinking. Her refusal to be bound by the limitations of what was considered advanced or perfect had shown the Centauri a new way forward, a way that embraced chaos, uncertainty, and, above all, creativity. The Centauri began to embrace the changes, both biological and social, that had come with the humans' intervention. They stopped seeing the plague as a tragedy and started to view it as a catalyst for their evolution, a necessary step in their journey towards something greater. There was still much work to be done, but for the first time in generations, the Centauri began to see the future with a sense of possibility, not dread. One of the most significant changes came in the form of the Centauri's leadership. Krell, the once proud admiral, found himself fundamentally changed by what had transpired. His rigid views on technology, perfection, and control had been shattered by the humans' approach. In the face of the plague, the Centauri's greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. They had relied too heavily on their technology, their perfection, and their control. They had forgotten that the true key to survival was adaptability and creativity. The humans had reminded them of that simple truth. Krell stood before a group of his fellow leaders in a private chamber, his mind racing with thoughts of what the future could look like. For the first time in his life, he wasn't concerned with maintaining the Centauri's supremacy. Instead, he was thinking about how to move forward, not just as a species, but as a galaxy. The humans had shown him something profound. It wasn't about being the strongest or the most technologically advanced. It was about working together, sharing knowledge, and learning from each other. As Krell addressed the council, he spoke with a newfound humility. For too long, we believed that we were the pinnacle of civilization. We thought that our perfection, our technology, our control over biology made us invincible. But what we've learned in the face of this plague is that perfection can be a prison. It can blind us to the solutions that lie outside our carefully constructed boundaries. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. The humans have shown us the true strength of creativity, of imperfection. They have shown us that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come not from rigid planning, but from the willingness to adapt, to embrace change, and to fail forward. We must learn from them, not just in medicine, but in every aspect of our civilization. As Krell spoke, he saw the faces of his fellow leaders shift. There was a subtle but undeniable change in their expressions. The Centauri had always prided themselves on their scientific and technological prowess, but now they were beginning to realize that true strength came from something more than perfect systems. It came from the ability to evolve, to adapt, and to grow. And with that, Krell made a decision that would change the future of the Centauri forever. "It's time we open our minds and our hearts to the galaxy," he said. "It's time we stop hoarding our knowledge and begin sharing it with others. We will no longer seek to dominate or control. We will seek to collaborate, to learn, and to grow together." The words hung in the air like a new dawn breaking over a long dark night. The Centauri, for the first time in their history, were ready to embrace something greater than themselves. They were ready to build a future, not alone, but alongside the humans and all the other species of the galaxy. The Great Awakening, as the humans had called it, wasn't just about curing the plague. It was about curing the very nature of the Centauri civilization. It was about realizing that perfection wasn't the answer, but imperfection, the willingness to evolve, was. And in that realization, the Centauri had not only saved their species, but had opened the door to a future where collaboration, creativity, and adaptability would define the galaxy. As the humans continued their work alongside the Centauri, Krell couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude. The humans had come to their rescue in their darkest hour, not just with their medical knowledge, but with a way of thinking that had transformed everything. They had shown the Centauri that the path to survival wasn't through control. It was through adaptability, cooperation, and above all, the power of the human spirit. And so, as the Centauri began to recover and evolve, they did so with a new understanding. The universe wasn't a place to be conquered, but a place to be embraced, flaws, chaos, and all. And the humans, those primitive beings, had taught them that lesson better than anyone else ever could.